Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Think for a second about property disputes.
Oh, they're usually so dry and cold.
Right, very calculated. You look at a ledger, you see a name, you check a boundary line, and a legal clerk just assigns the deed.
Yeah, it is very cut and dry.
But what happens when the property in question, does not even exist in your possession yet?
Oh, that makes it complicated.
Yuri,
Yeah.
what happens when the current occupants are literal giants and the people trying to inherit this hypothetical land are five sisters living in a canvas tent in the middle of a desert?
That is quite the scenario.
It is, and you, sitting right there listening to this, are about to be pulled into a fascinating historical predicament. Our deep dive today centers on a sermon delivered by the famous London preacher C.H. Spurgeon.
Right, at the Metropolitan Tabernacle.
Yes, and it was published on April 10th, 1909. The title is Women's Rights, a Parable.
It is such an intriguing title for the time period.
Definitely. Spurgeon anchors this sermon in number 17.5, specifically the line, "And Moses brought their cause before the Lord."
Which is such a small line, but it carries so much weight.
It really does. Our objective today is to look at how Spurgeon takes this obscure account of five sisters and uses it to illustrate this massive theological framework about faith.
Faith, heavenly inheritance, and divine mediation.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the historical reality on the ground. Why are these women facing this specific legal crisis?
Well, to understand their crisis, we really have to grasp the sheer scale of the historical backdrop here.
Right, the context is huge.
It is. We are looking at the children of Israel. They have been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years.
Which is just a staggering amount of time. That is 4 decades of sand, manna, heat, and, well, waiting.
Yeah, an entire generation has literally died off in this desert because of prior rebellion against God.
So they have not yet seen the promised land. Not at all.
No, they have not. But God made a covenant with them. He swore to bring them into a land flowing with milk and honey.
He declared that this territory would belong to them and to their descendants by a covenant of salt forever.
A covenant of salt. That specific phrasing means it is an unbreakable perpetual agreement.
Right, spot on. It is a permanent bond. And into this massive national waiting period step the daughters of Zelophehad.
Spurgeon names 2 of them in his text, I think. Tirzah and Milcah.
Yes, Tirzah and Milcah. But the biblical account tells us there were actually 5 of them.
Okay. And they have a severe legal and social problem on their hands.
A massive problem. They have no brothers.
Which, in the ancient Near East is basically an absolute disaster for a family's legacy.
Oh, completely. Land inheritance was passed down almost entirely through the male line back then.
Right? So if you did not have a son, your family's name was effectively erased from the tribal registry.
Yeah, the plot of land assigned to your family would just be absorbed by other relatives.
So without brothers, these 5 women are essentially watching their family's portion of the promised land vanish into thin air. Poof, gone. Their father has died, and they are left with 0 legal standing.
That is terrifying.
That is the crux of their anxiety. And Spurgeon draws a really sharp contrast here to highlight the nature of true faith.
He brings up Esau, right?
He does. Esau is infamous for thinking so little of his birthright that he sold it to his brother Jacob for, well, a single bowl of lentil stew.
A bowl of stew. I mean, Esau had the inheritance guaranteed by birth. It was literally his.
It was. But he despised it for immediate physical gratification. The smell of the stew in the present was more real to him than the promise of the future.
Wow. And these 5 sisters are the complete opposite of Esau.
Totally the opposite. They have never seen the land. They have been wandering in a literal desert their entire lives.
They do not even have a deed in their hands.
Nothing. Yet they believed this unseen inheritance was substantial. They were terrified of being forgotten in the distribution.
Spurgeon takes this historical reality, this desert anxiety, and he pivots to a heavenly analogy.
He does. He uses their belief in the unseen land of Canaan to illustrate the Christians' belief in heaven.
And he uses incredibly vivid imagery for his congregation. He describes heaven as a city with streets of gold.
Yeah, pointing out that no traveler has ever come back to write out the celestial score.
Or teach us a sonnet sung by what he calls flaming tongues above.
That phrasing is amazing.
Yeah.
He makes the point that heaven is entirely a matter of faith.
Right. Disembodied souls mount to be with Christ, and later our bodies rise to join our spirit so that body and soul may be glorified together.
It is a beautiful picture.
It is. To put this in perspective for you, think of a person structuring their entire life around a massive inheritance held in trust.
Like in a foreign country they've never visited.
Yeah, they've never seen the bank vault, they have never met the executor of the estate.
But they arrange their whole financial and personal life around the fact that this trust fund is real.
But this raises a question for you, the listener. I am looking at the brutal reality of 1909 London, where Spurgeon's sermons were circulating.
Oh, it was a rough time and place. Immense poverty, smog, disease.
And harsh labor. So how does Spurgeon expect people living in a very harsh, immediate reality to maintain such intense focus on a completely invisible future?
That is where the Reformed view of covenant promises becomes so crucial to his argument.
Break that down a bit.
Well, Spurgeon is operating within a framework where the land of Canaan was not just some vague hope or a wishful thought.
Yeah.
It was guaranteed by a divine decree. God said it would happen, so it was a certainty.
Okay, so when you understand that salvation and the heavenly inheritance are secured by the unbreakable decree of God, your perspective completely shifts.
Yes, the sister's anxiety about their inheritance is not a sign of doubt in God at all.
It is actually proof of their faith in the covenant.
Precisely. They believed the land was so real, and God's promise was so sure, that their only concern was making sure their names were properly registered for it.
They were not asking if the land was real. They were just asking how to make sure their family was included when it was divided up.
Right. For the believer living in the harsh reality of the daily wilderness, focusing on the unseen future is sustained by resting on the absolute certainty of the promiser.
Faith is taking God at his word.
Yeah. If he says there is a celestial city, that its existence is more concrete than the cobblestone streets of London.
I see the logic there. If the promiser is infallible, the invisible promise is actually more solid than the visible hardships.
That is the core of it.
And that leads us right into the massive obstacles standing in the way of actually obtaining this land.
Because it is one thing to believe the land exists. It is another thing entirely to walk in and take it.
Yeah, and this brings us to the spies. The Israelites sent 12 spies into Canaan to scout the territory.
And 10 of them came back with an incredibly discouraging report. Spurgeon calls it an evil report.
These spies claimed the inhabitants were literal giants.
They said the Israelites felt like grasshoppers in comparison. Can you imagine hearing that?
Not great for morale. They reported that the cities were walled up to heaven and the enemy possessed chariots of iron.
They even claimed the land eats up the inhabitants thereof.
Meaning they described it as full of pestilence and extreme danger.
The psychological terror of that report just cannot be overstated.
Yeah, you have a population of former slaves living in tents, armed with basic tools.
And they are told they have to fight giants with iron military technology.
Hearing this, the general population of Israel completely panicked. They wanted to give up entirely.
They started romanticizing their past slavery, which is crazy to think about.
They really did. They said they missed the leeks, the garlic, the onions, and the flesh pots of Ramesses in Egypt.
The desire for the flesh pots of Ramesses is such a bizarre psychological phenomenon.
It really is. The Israelites desiring the food of their slavery is a perfect analogy for settling for cheap, immediate gratification.
Yeah, just because a long-term goal looks too difficult to achieve.
It is like quitting a grueling medical residency to go work a minimum wage job just because the residency is too stressful in the current moment.
Right, you forfeit the future for the predictable comfort of the present.
They would rather go back to making bricks under the whip of an overseer because at least the overseer fed them onions.
But the 5 sisters rejected that bad report. They knew they could not fight.
Spurgeon paints a great picture here, noting they had probably never held a weapon more terrible than a needle.
I love that visual. A needle against iron chariots.
Yet, they believed God's right arm would win the victory and drive the Canaanites out.
They trusted the divine warrior, not their own military prowess.
This historical moment of rejecting the evil report is where Spurgeon directly addresses the skeptics of his own day.
He gives them names too, Mr. Atheist and Sir Ironical Skeptic.
He points out that skeptics mock believers for going on a wild goose chase, running over hedge and ditch for a country they know nothing of.
Simply trusting an old-fashioned book.
Spurgeon is responding to the rising tide of rationalism and higher criticism in late 19th and early 20th century Europe.
To counter this, Spurgeon introduces a striking wager.
Oh, the wager. He says that if there is no heaven, believers are just as well off as the skeptic in the end.
But if there is a hell, he asks the skeptic, where, oh where wilt thou be?
He uses this to bolster the confidence of his congregation, urging them to ignore the modern evil reports that say heaven is a myth and hell is a fairy tale.
Right.
But I need to push back on that wager for a moment. Is Spurgeon just making a pragmatic bet here?
How do you mean?
Well, it sounds identical to Pascal's wager. Is he saying we should believe just to cover our bases?
Ah, I see what you're getting at.
Or is he using this rhetorically to highlight the absolute confidence these women had in God's military victory? Because making a mathematical bet on eternity feels very different than the faith of the daughters of Zelophehad.
That is a brilliant distinction to draw. While it sounds very much like Pascal's wager on the surface, Spurgeon is using it differently.
Okay.
Pascal was making a philosophical and mathematical argument about probability. Spurgeon is using it rhetorically to expose the absurdity and the massive risk of unbelief.
So he is shifting the burden of proof.
Exactly. I mean, yes, spot on. The women are not making a calculated bet based on odds. They are displaying absolute confidence in a victorious God,
They are relying entirely on the Lord of hosts and Jehovah Nissi.
which means the Lord our banner. Spurgeon is mocking the skeptic's position by showing that even in a worst-case scenario, the believer loses nothing.
But the skeptic risks absolute ruin.
Right. The victory for the believer is assured because salvation is the gift of God.
The daughters of Zelophehad knew they could not defeat iron chariots with needles, but they knew the God who parted the Red Sea could handle the giants of Canaan.
Their confidence was placed entirely outside of themselves.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If the land is real, and God is guaranteed to conquer the giants, the logical next step is a burning desire to ensure your own name is on the deed.
Oh, for sure. Spurgeon spends a significant amount of time commending these women for their anxiety to possess a portion.
He contrasts them with other young women in the camp who are completely distracted by trivial things.
He describes these other women as only caring about polishing their mirrors, looking to their dresses, and tuning their timbrels.
Tuning their timbrels. These distracted women figured there was plenty of time to worry about the Hivites and Hittites later.
Why bother with military rosters and land deeds when you can polish brass in the desert, right?
Right. But the daughters of Zelophehad were prudent. They thought ahead to the muster roll.
They dreaded the idea of being outcasts or beggars while everyone else received a plot of land.
Spurgeon makes sure his listeners understand the sheer value of this land to justify the sisters' anxiety.
It was bought at a massive price. He references the smitten firstborn of Egypt and the sprinkling of blood at Passover.
The land boasts the grapes of Eshcol, pomegranates, olives, and rivers of milk and honey.
Spurgeon uses this physical description to stir up a spiritual desire for heaven in his listeners.
He quotes the Countess of Huntington, a prominent figure in the 18th century Methodist and Calvinist revivals.
What's her quote?
She wrote, "But can I bear the piercing thought, what if my name should be left out, when thou for them shalt call?"
That is heavy.
Spurgeon describes heaven's physical glories to create a deep longing. Foundations of chrysolite, gates of pearl, walls of jasper.
And he contrasts that beauty with the awful sentence, "Depart, ye cursed, into everlasting fire."
That quote from the Countess of Huntington really strikes a nerve. It reminds me of someone checking a winning lottery ticket 10 times in a row.
Yeah, just staring at the numbers.
You are not checking the ticket because you doubt the numbers printed on the paper. You check it repeatedly because the stakes are astronomically high.
You want to be absolutely sure you are holding the genuine article.
But I have a theological question here. How does Spurgeon reconcile this intense anxiety about being left out with the assurance and rest that Christians are supposed to experience?
That is a very valid point.
In Reformed circles, we talk about the perseverance of the saints. We talk about resting in grace. If a believer is supposed to have assurance, why is Spurgeon commending anxiety?
Well, Spurgeon navigates the tension between assurance and self-examination very carefully.
How so?
In Reformed theology, the perseverance of the saints means that those whom God has truly saved will not lose their salvation.
Right.
However, Spurgeon distinguishes clearly between an unbelieving anxiety, which doubts God's character, and a wholly prudent urgency.
A prudent urgency. I like that.
Yeah, an urgency which values the promise so highly that it refuses to take it for granted. True faith does not lead to apathy.
It does not lead to sitting back and polishing mirrors while ignoring eternity.
No, true faith leads to active, serious self-examination regarding your standing before God.
The sisters were anxious because they knew the normal customs of the day excluded them.
They needed a specific legal ruling to secure their portion. Spurgeon is urging his listeners to recognize their own natural exclusion from heaven due to sin.
He wants them to feel a prudent urgency to ensure they have been grafted into the covenant.
Yes, the assurance comes after the matter is settled with the mediator, not before you have even bothered to check your standing.
That is a very helpful clarification. Assurance is the result of applying to the mediator, not an excuse to avoid him.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the legal barrier the women faced. They desire the land intensely, they reject the skeptics, and they want their names on the muster roll.
But under the law of their day, they have no legal standing to inherit.
So how do they overcome this? Spurgeon points out what they did not do. They did not go complaining from tent to tent, spreading doubts.
They did not try to stir up a rebellion. They did not try to take the land by force or manipulate the system.
And most significantly, they did not plead personal merit.
They did not say, we are the best tent makers in the camp, so we deserve land.
Right. Instead, they went straight to Moses.
Moses acted as their head and their mediator. Moses took their cause and laid it directly before the Lord.
And the Lord's verdict is stunning. The daughters of Zelophehad speak right. God decreed that they should inherit land precisely as if they were sons.
Spurgeon takes this historical legal ruling and applies it directly to the seeking sinner. He says the sinner must go to Jesus, the prophet like unto Moses.
A sinner's cause is sorry on its own. We have no legal standing before a holy God.
But Spurgeon says Jesus has a sweet way of mixing himself up with thee and thyself with him.
So that the sinner's cause and the Savior's cause become one.
Yes. When the sinner beats their breast crying, God be merciful to me, a sinner, God hears the mediator and replies, that soul speaks right.
This is a picture of the core doctrine of imputed righteousness and Christ as the sole mediator.
The sisters brought their lack to the mediator. They did not bring wealth. They had no brothers, no legal standing.
In the same way, sinners bring their lack of righteousness to Christ. The success of the plea relies entirely on the mediator standing before the Father.
Well said.
Wait, hold on. We use the phrase imputed righteousness quite a bit in reform circles, but mechanically, how does that actually work in this legal analogy?
That is a great question.
Because to a modern listener, it sounds like a legal fiction. If a human judge just pretends a guilty person is innocent and hands them a reward, we would call that corrupt.
Oh, totally corrupt.
How is Christ mixing himself up with thee, not just God pretending a sinner is righteous?
That is a vital clarification to ask for. It is not a legal fiction. It is a transfer of actual substantive record based on representation.
Okay, unpack that.
In Reformed theology, we talk about double imputation. First, the believer's sin is imputed or legally credited to Christ on the cross.
So Christ actually bears the penalty for it.
Yes, the justice demanded by the law is fully satisfied. Second, Christ's perfect active obedience to the law is imputed to the believer.
Because Christ acts as the federal head or the legal representative of his people?
Right. His righteousness belongs to them just as surely as a husband's wealth belongs to his wife in a legal union.
When Spurgeon talks about Christ mixing himself up with the sinner, he's describing this unbreakable union.
The believer's debt becomes Christ's, and Christ's righteous inheritance becomes the believer's.
Because Moses was accepted by God, the women's plea was heard.
Because Christ is perfectly righteous and accepted by the Father, the sinner who is legally united to Christ is also accepted.
So God is not pretending the sinner is righteous. He is looking at the actual righteousness of Christ, which has been legally credited to the sinner's account.
Precisely.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Think about it like a person facing a completely hopeless court case.
They're guilty, they have no defense, and the penal code is entirely against them.
Instead of trying to argue their own innocence or bribe the jury, they hand all their paperwork over to the Supreme Judge's own child.
That child then steps into the courtroom and argues the case on their behalf,
legally blending their own perfect record with the defendant's plea. But I want to ask about the daughter's specific approach.
Sure.
Why does Spurgeon focus so heavily on the fact that these women did not plead their own merit, they just stated their lack of brothers?
Yeah, it is a very subtle point.
Why is that specific lack of self-justification so crucial to his sermon?
It is crucial because the human default setting is always to plead personal merit. We constantly want to justify ourselves.
That is so true.
If the daughters had argued that they were particularly pious or that they worked harder than the men in the camp, they would have been arguing for wages, not grace.
They would have been trying to earn the inheritance.
Yes. By highlighting their lack of merit, Spurgeon eliminates works righteousness.
He wants his congregation to see that entering heaven is not a matter of proving how good you are.
It is a matter of admitting you have no right to be there and throwing yourself entirely on the mercy of the mediator.
If salvation could be earned by merit, then Christ's mediation would be unnecessary.
But because we are completely lacking in merit, mediation is our only hope.
The verdict from God, the daughters of Zelophehad speak right, is God validating their reliance on his covenant mercy rather than their own works.
Spot on. That makes the legal mechanics very clear, and it sets us up for the final major shift in the sermon.
Having laid out this grand theological doctrine of mediation and imputed righteousness, Spurgeon pivots to the practical pastoral application.
He takes this historical account and aims it directly at the people sitting in the pews of the Metropolitan Tabernacle.
He targets three specific groups in his congregation. The first group is unconverted young women.
He warns them against the wicked metropolis of London.
Remember, this is Edwardian London, filled with distractions, theaters, and a rapidly changing social scene.
He cautions them against frivolous mirth and idle companions. He urges them to seek first the kingdom of God.
And he warns them not to sell Christ for a giddy song. He is pleading with them not to be like the women in the wilderness who are tuning their timbrels while ignoring the upcoming inheritance.
And then he moves to the second group, the children of godly parents.
He notes a very specific detail from the biblical text that we have not touched on yet.
Right. When the daughters approach Moses, they state clearly that their father, Zelophehad, did not die in Korah's rebellion.
Now, Korah's rebellion is recorded in Numbers 16. It was a massive, famous mutiny against Moses and Aaron.
Korah and his followers challenged the God-ordained leadership, and God judged them severely.
The earth literally opened up and swallowed the rebels. It was a stain on the national memory.
The daughters make a point to say that their father died an ordinary death in the wilderness, not as a rebel against the Lord.
Spurgeon uses this historical footnote to urge the children in his audience not to disgrace their family profession.
He argues that if the sons lack ambition, the daughters should step up to keep the family represented in the church.
It is a call to generational faithfulness.
Then he addresses the third group, which is perhaps the most emotional part of the sermon, the orphans.
Because the parents of these 5 sisters could not go to Moses for them, the daughters went for themselves.
Spurgeon paints this incredibly poignant picture. He describes mothers, fathers, honored grandsires, grandmothers, and even young infants waiting on the battlements of heaven.
He pleads with the orphans in his congregation, saying, "Break not your households in twain."
It is like a relay race, where the baton has been dropped because a runner fell.
And someone else in the family has to run back, pick up that baton, and finish the race to honor the team.
Right.
But hearing this emotional appeal to family honor and not breaking the household in two, does this contradict his earlier theological point?
How so?
He just spent the first half of the sermon proving that salvation is not based on merit or family lines. Merit does not save you.
Right, it does not.
But now he's leaning heavily on family legacy to motivate them. That seems a bit contradictory.
Well, that tension is very common when reading historical reform sermons. We have to understand how Spurgeon holds individual responsibility and covenantal continuity together.
Okay, break that down for us.
Spurgeon is not contradicting himself. He is operating within a robust covenantal framework. In Reformed theology, we recognize that God frequently works through family lines.
Promising to be a God to believers and to their children.
Exactly. Spurgeon knows perfectly well that the faith of the parents cannot save the child. Grace is not genetically inherited.
The orphans cannot say, "My father was a Christian, therefore I am saved."
Right. They must go to the mediator for themselves, just as the 5 daughters had to go to Moses themselves.
However, the legacy of the parents should provoke the child to seek that same mediator.
The emotional appeal to the battlements of heaven is meant to stir the affections. He's trying to make the unseen reality of heaven feel tangible to people who are grieving.
He is essentially saying, your parents trusted this mediator and found him faithful. Why wouldn't you?
It is a pastoral urging to look at the verifiable faith of their ancestors as evidence that the covenant is real.
Prompting them to exercise their own individual faith in Christ.
Yes.
We have covered tremendous ground today. We started in a dusty wilderness, looking at 5 sisters who were anxious about a piece of property they had never seen.
We watched them reject the terrifying reports of giants, walled cities, and skeptics, choosing instead to trust the Lord of hosts.
We unpacked the legal mechanism of divine mediation. We saw how they brought their lack of standing directly to Moses.
Just as we bring our lack of righteousness to Christ for imputation.
And we saw how Spurgeon applied this historical event directly to the unconverted, the children of believers, and the orphans in London.
calling everyone to secure their eternal inheritance.
What stands out to me is how a seemingly minor legal dispute over land distribution in the Book of Numbers opens up the entire landscape of the gospel.
It shows that God's covenant is comprehensive. It addresses the legal demands of justice while simultaneously providing the mediator to fulfill those very demands for his people.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. This builds on the historical account, but stretches beyond what we have discussed so far.
Well, this is a great point.
The daughters of Zelophehad did not just secure their own inheritance. Because they stepped forward in faith, God established a statute of judgment that changed the law for all future generations of women in Israel.
Their individual act of faith altered the legal landscape for everyone who came after them.
From that day on, if a man died with no sons, his inheritance passed to his daughters by divine law.
It is incredible.
Consider what unseen generational legacies you might be creating when you step forward in faith to claim God's promises in your own life.
Your reliance on the mediator today might just be the statute of judgment that shapes your family for generations.
Thank you for spending your time analyzing this historical text with us. Keep questioning, keep studying, and keep considering the texts and sources that shape your worldview. We will catch you on the next deep dive.